last couple of years, really. Bidenomics. Why does the president not seem to be getting the credit that other political leaders might get if the economy had done as well as it has under his leadership?
I think fortunately and unfortunately this is something that every president faces, right? Especially in an election year, it's the whole, are you better off than you were 4 years ago? I used to be a U.S. economy reporter, we would look at that and say, you know, there's only so much a president can do and have control over. Yes, the policies have an impact over time, but to try to turn around an economy immediately or to destroy an economy immediately, not that you're trying, it owes to much more than just the president himself. But to your point, yes, things have gotten markedly better in the economy if you're looking just at inflation and employment over the past couple of years, especially recovering from COVID. However, on the inflation point, it's a hard sell for American households, especially those who are most focused on grocery shopping. We've been looking at prices of groceries going up a full 5 percentage points more than overall consumer prices compared to pre-COVID. And so it's really kind of grating on households that prices haven't come down fast enough, and they're looking at levels. They're not looking at, oh, you know, things haven't gone up as fast as they had before. So it's the old kind of dilemma that, you know, policymakers have in trying to sell an improvement in inflation that's just not hitting the mark just yet with voters.
Do you think a lot of people, because they haven't experienced inflation like this for such a long period of time, some never, do have a feeling that they were better off under the Trump administration?
Yeah, that could be the case too, and especially with the younger generation that's just now, you know, getting into the workforce and is, you know, adjusting their incomes and not seeing that, you know, perhaps this could get better in a year or 2 years, and they don't have the patience for it. And so I think, you know, for all those reasons, and the fact, as you mentioned, that we haven't seen inflation like this, like we had during COVID since the 70s, and a lot of people weren't around for that. The biggest segment of the population definitely wasn't around for that. So it's a dilemma that the, you know, Biden administration is going to have to work through and try to convince people that things are getting better.
Well, it's going to be interesting to see how that unfolds as the election campaign begins to pick up in the United States. We're going to be looking in some detail at the Chinese economy. We'll be talking to Andy about with the problems that the Chinese economy is facing at this point in time. Do people point the fingers at the Communist Party? Do they point the fingers at the president and blame him for some of the challenges, particularly when it comes to unemployment?
We'll head back to Business Matters shortly. In an hour, the climate question is asking, how does extreme heat affect pregnant women?
If it's things in our environment, like extreme heat, that could be having an impact, then it's so important that women can at least know about potential risks so that they can better protect themselves against it.
After that, you can hear Outlook.
When American journalist Lucy Sexton was working on a TV series about the 1979 Iranian hostage crisis, her dad Joe, also a journalist, was abducted on assignment in Libya. What came next was a surreal week of dark coincidence that upended both their lives.
And at 4:30 GMT, join us for our documentary series, Hollywood Exiles.
You know, people love the movies, they love the movie stars. So if you went after Hollywood and could sort of expose some of these people, it was instant publicity. I mean, headlines all the time.
You have all that to look forward to on the BBC World Service.
You're listening to Business Matters here on the BBC World Service with me, Rahul Tandon. We've got Andy in China, we've got Michelle in the United States. We're going to be taking a close look at the Chinese economy. It's trying to attract more people from the West to go and work there by easing visa restrictions. We'll find out, is that going to work? And if you ever quit your job, would you tell the world? We're going to hear from somebody who did just that.
BBC News with Moira Alderson. The US Coast Guard says 6 people still missing after a container ship brought down a key bridge in the city of Baltimore are now presumed dead. Officials also said they were suspending their search and rescue operation and focusing on a recovery mission. The Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant has sought to cool recent tensions with the US. He said he had stressed the importance of US-Israeli ties during talks with his American counterpart Lloyd Austin in Washington. Thousands of people have marched in the Hungarian capital, Budapest. It follows the release of a recording which allegedly implicates ministers in a corruption scandal. The main opposition group in Venezuela says it's managed to register a candidate for July's presidential election, despite its first and second choices being declined. Edmundo Gonzalez, a former ambassador, will stand against President Nicolas Maduro. The independent US presidential candidate Robert F. Kennedy Jr. has announced a Silicon Valley lawyer, Nicole Shanahan, as his running mate. His anti-establishment campaign has worried Democrats, who are concerned he could take votes from President Joe Biden, who's vying with Donald Trump for a second term. The US media network NBC News says it will drop the former chairwoman of the Republican National Committee, Ronna McDaniel, as a political contributor. Her hiring was widely criticized by staff. President Volodymyr Zelensky has praised Ukraine's men's football team after they beat Iceland 2-1 in a playoff final to qualify for this summer's European Championships in Germany. Dachshunds, also known as sausage dogs, could be banned in Germany under a new law which would prohibit breeding practices, inflicting long-term suffering on the animals. But the German Kennel Club has launched a petition to save what they called our favourite dogs. That's the latest. BBC News.
You're listening to Business Matters here on BBC World Service with me, Rahul Tandon. We've got Andy there in China. We've got Michelle in the United States. Let's talk about relations between the world's two largest economies for a few minutes now, because we know that in the last 24 hours, the US and the UK unveiled sweeping measures against hackers backed by China's government, alleging they carried out extensive cyber attacks across targets in Washington and Westminster. What sort of reaction has there been to this, Andy, within China?
Well, very little. I think that people don't pay attention to stuff like that, and obviously Chinese media doesn't play up something like that. So people actually don't know much about it.
Give us your sense of where relations lie between the world's two great economies, Andy.
Well, I think that the U.S. will continue its path of the decoupling. It's just the U.S. is having difficulties. So far, decoupling has led to this production assembly actually shifting to Mexico and Vietnam. But in terms of Chinese value added, I'm not sure there is much change. The two economies are still very much entwined, maybe partly through Vietnam and Mexico. But in the long run, I see a lot of troubles. And the Chinese side obviously doesn't view it that way. That's why they are pouring money into developing technologies to become self-reliant. So right now, it looks like a period of calm. The two governments try to work together. But in the long run, I still see stormy waters ahead.
Michelle, you'll be covering that election campaign. How much do you think China will feature within the campaign? Because we've heard Donald Trump talking quite openly, haven't we, about the tariffs he would like to see put on Chinese products.
Yeah, well, I think to the extent that foreign policy plays out in a domestic U.S. presidential campaign, I think China is near the top of the list. In part because it's one of the only things that both political parties can generally agree on, is the need to kind of, as Andy said, for his part on the China side, to be more self-reliant. And the U.S. has a view of the same thing, that they want to develop their own technologies and be less reliant on the world's #2 economy. So I think both countries have similar interests and similar goals for themselves, but it's proving very hard to achieve that for their own means. And at the same time, they're the leaders right now, while we have Xi and Biden in office, are kind of preaching this message of stability, of calm, of stabilizing relations. I was there in San Francisco during the November APEC forum and the sidelines and the Biden-Xi meeting there. And it was the same deal. I mean, even though there were different messages sent to their domestic populations after the meeting about what had occurred, and Chinese media had a very different read from U.S. media at the same time. The overarching theme was we're talking, things are stable, and we're not fighting. But that's a pretty low bar these days for relations.
It is a very low bar. Let's talk about another area where we might see some improvement in relations between the two countries, and that's about the visas that may be offered by China to people from the US who want to come and work in the country, because over the past week China has outlined plans to ease visa conditions in a bid to attract more international workers and of course investments in 2022. Foreign direct investment in China was $33 billion, a decrease of nearly 18% in 2022. I've been getting reaction to these developments from Sean Steen. He's the chairman of the American Chamber of Commerce in China.
Yeah, I think it's actually more than sort of a signal. I think what's really happened is China has looked at its foreign investment numbers, which are way down. They're down to 30-year lows to get ready to measure it. And they're trying to do the math about why that is. And they've seen that one of the reasons they think that's part of that is that all of the expats, or a large percentage of the expat population, left during the COVID lockdowns and haven't returned. So as they're putting together this package of measures to get foreign investors more interested in recommitting to the China market, this is one thing that they're doing, is trying to make it easier for companies to bring expats back and make it easier for expats that are here to regularize their visa into a status that lets them work continually here without having to run to Hong Kong or run into other jurisdictions to renew their visas. So it's a positive step.
It is a positive step. You were there, and you will be talking to many people from different countries who live in China, but particularly Americans. Do you get a sense that more and more people want to leave China?
So I get a sense that many people left during COVID, depending on on the nationality and on the city. In some places it's 50%, in some places it's 60%. And there's a certain segment of the population that thought if they waited it out through COVID, that things might change sort of in a fundamental way, and they might stay. What we've seen is that some of those people have realized that things are still going to be tough for a while, and so that maybe now is the time to go, even though they stayed. But most of the people who left, I think, already left. What we are seeing, though, is we are seeing people to start trickling back. I think the demographic mix is a little different than it was before, but we are seeing more expats coming back.
We are seeing China facing some serious economic challenges. With the rate of growth beginning to slow down, does that mean that a lot of foreign companies look at China and think there may be better parts of the world to locate in?
Yeah, I think this is part of the natural sort of progression in China, right? If we go back a few years when China was growing at 8%, 9%, 10%, then companies could get very high rates of return on their investments in China. Profits were high, the market was growing. Now that China's growth rate has become lower, what companies have seen is that their profitability in China is either on par or maybe a little bit lower than some of the other jurisdictions around the world, like the EU, like the United States. So China's has gone from being the must-invest location to one of a variety of locations. And so I think China has realized that for the first time it needs to actively court foreign investment because it's just not going to come on its own. And so these visa changes and some other changes are part of China's rethink about how it approaches foreign investors, and it realizes it needs to engage in a little bit of a beauty contest or a charm offensive to try and convince them to come back.
Yeah, let's see how successful that is. This has been a period of high tensions, hasn't it, between the US and China. And we have seen China take some actions against US companies, haven't we? Does that add to the uncertainty? When you have conversations with people, does that mean that they worry about their future in China?
I'll tell you, one of the most interesting conversations I've had is, we've had a large number of U.S. companies visiting, either their global CEO or their global C-suite coming to China. And the disconnect between what companies are talking about on the ground with what companies are talking about overseas is really stark. Many of the CEOs, when they come in, their first questions are, how safe are my people? How secure is my office? Do we need to worry about, potential detention or other issues? Or do we need to worry about, sort of a real break between the United States and China, that might lead to some sort of conflict over some geopolitical, flashpoint? And so it really does weigh on the mentality of, I think, boards and CEOs, overseas. When you talk to their local subsidiaries or the local CEO, the American person in China that's running the operation, or the European in China running the operation, what's keeping them up at night isn't the safety and the security issues. It's just the extraordinarily competitive environment here, combined with what until recently has been a slow deterioration in the investment climate, meaning it's been harder and harder to operate and harder to be profitable here. So there's been a bit of a disconnect in how companies look at this. It's absolutely true that a fear that an uncertainty about where the red lines are that could get you in trouble or could get your company in trouble with the government or the security services has been a factor that has, I think, led to a downturn in investment and it made sentiment much less positive, certainly in boardrooms in the US and in Europe.
Do you think we'll ever see the days return when we had the number of people from the likes of the US who were in China pre the pandemic, or have those days gone?
Yeah, sadly, I think we're not going to see, I see, a decade or more before we maybe have the same number of expatriates in China. I mean, look, we had, at our peak, I think we might have had 14 to 15,000 American students in China in 1 year. Now we're down to less than 1,000. And then in terms of foreign companies, they used to have a fairly sizable expat footprint. But as the expats were forced to leave during the lockdowns of the last few years, then, the companies had to keep going. And so in many cases, those positions were localized, and they found some very highly qualified Chinese employees to take on those roles. And so in some cases, those positions aren't there. But I think the reality is that what China has come to realize is that having a mix of foreign talent and local talent in the MNCs and in the offices helps tie the home office and the China office together and eases communication and other things. And that not having expatriates here is really working to China's detriment because it is affecting how their country is viewed overseas.
Andy, give us your sense of what Sean Stein was saying, who, of course, the chairman of the American Chamber of Commerce in China. Give us your sense of what you see around in Shanghai. Do you get a sense that people, expats, Americans, others, Europeans living in Shanghai are worried about their future there?
Yeah, I think that the issue is that China now, Chinese companies have become very competitive. And, Chinese economy was dominated by global companies, like in the automobile sector or in the consumer sector. Now, in the last few years, Chinese companies have become very competitive. So their profit margins come down. And global companies are really cutting the expat headcount, especially those with expat packages, and the people who are staying. Actually, they are taking local packages. Some of my neighbors, that's what I hear from them. So from that perspective, that China is normalizing. You look at Korea or Japan or Germany, they developed it without the FDI, foreign investment, or a lot of expats. So I think China is maturing, going down that path. But the visa thing is really about making professionals easier to live in China. They can work for foreign companies or Chinese companies, but it's not that the expensive managers who stay in Shanghai and it's hard to say what the value added they have. So this is sort of it's changing strategy in terms of economics. Also, there's this view that that person-to-person diplomacy is very important. If you have a lot of foreigners working in China, and suddenly they see what they see, and China suddenly is not going to win the propaganda war. The Chinese cannot talk like Anglo-Saxons, they dominate. Chinese like you look at the American companies, Chinese really don't become CEOs. They have to build their own companies. So I think the Chinese economy is like behaving in a similar way. So this visa thing will, I think, attract a lot of people. There's a shortage of teachers for international schools, and Chinese companies want to hire designers. These are talents that China needs, and I think they're surplus in the West. So it's a win-win.
Michelle, Andy makes a good point there about the changing nature even within global companies of staff. You were in Singapore for 6 years. Do you think a lot of global companies look at it and think, yeah, we need some Americans, maybe in China, but we can hire quite a lot of local staff as well because it is cheaper?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is the case for many localities, for many international localities, I should say. But I think China is a tricky case, both for the state of the relations between the U.S. and China, as well as the regulatory atmosphere on both sides, both with what the U.S. is trying to do to crack down on certain views that it has of Chinese companies and their operations, and at the same time, as we've been talking about, what the Chinese side is doing to U.S. corporates in China and the uncertainty there. And so I think it is a special case. And I think one thing that didn't come up with your previous guest, I'm surprised he didn't use this phrase because I'm hearing it all the time from international businesses who are on the ground in China. They're calling all these promises and visa restriction lifting and all that sort of thing promise fatigue. They say, there's so many pledges that have happened recently, earlier this year, making digital data transfer easier, this and that, coming out of the China State Council last week, plus this week with the China Development Forum, these big appeals that China is open for business. And a lot of these policy changes that they've wanted to hear, but corporate leaders, especially those from the U.S., have been saying, I'll believe it when I see it. There's only so long that they can wait to see these realities on the ground and to have the certainty that they won't be fined or, rated on or have some other penalties and worry for themselves, their companies, or their employees. So I think there is still kind of a latent fear about some of those issues that is going to take some time to go away.
Yeah, let us see how that begins to develop. Now, let us turn to our last story. Would you ever quit your job and tell the world? Michelle, would you do that? Would you like to do it now on this program?
Call me old-fashioned, but I don't think that would be the way that I would quit my job, and I'm also not so active on social media, so I would be the wrong person to ask.
Okay, I think that was a no, a pretty definitive one. Andy, you're an independent economist. I don't know if you can quit yourself, can you?
No, I cannot. But I think that it's a new generation thing. People think life is a video, so a bunch of videos. So that's a new world. And we must accept the next generation.
Well, there we go. There's words of wisdom for you. Well, whether they're leaving of their own accord or they're being fired, it appears that Generation Z are far from keeping quiet. Instead, it seems many recording the moment either during or immediately afterwards and uploading it onto social media sites such as TikTok. Apparently, it's called QuitTok. And one woman at the forefront of the trend is Gabrielle Judge, based in Denver, Colorado. She recently posted herself quitting her job last year, and it's gone viral on TikTok. Let's take a listen.
For now, this doesn't really seem aligned, and like my personal life and my business is kind of getting in the way of this job.
Yeah, so expand on that a little bit. I guess, like, how would you like to approach that from our side? Like, what can we do, or what can we understand to make that make sense?
I would love to allow someone else who's really excited about this spot to kind of take over from here on out, just because I think that makes the most sense, especially with the goals that you have. They're so important and progressive that someone who's really in it needs to be in this.
Gabrielle is far from alone in doing this. There have been more than 100 million views of these QuitTok videos worldwide, and Gabrielle's own videos posting as anti-work girl boss have been viewed 4 million times, and she joins us on the program. Now, Gabrielle, is delighted to have you here on Business Matters. Why did you decide to do this? What was going through your mind when you came up with this decision?
Hey, thanks for having me. Yeah, it's so funny to listen back just even as you played it
just now. I was in a completely different stage of my life.
Go on,
and
tell me,
that's probably the most-
when you heard it, what did you think?
Yeah, I mean, that was probably the most anticlimactic quit I've ever done. Honestly, I think I was really scared. Honestly, I was super nervous, and I was taking a jump for my business and, you know, doing that full time. And so, you know, there wasn't really a reason I was quitting. And so that was probably the craziest part about it. And so, yeah, when I was filming that, that was really just for my own personal use as kind of a memory to reflect on, you know, that moment in my life as I progressed with my business. I was really keeping it for myself. But as you've noticed over the past year or so, Quit Talk is so popular. So, you know, I thought, hey, why don't I post this as well and kind of share the stories.
Tell me about the most climatic moments when you quit, the most dramatic ones that maybe you didn't record. Did you record those ones as well?
I've never had a dramatic quit, unfortunately.
Oh, you haven't? Why do you think it has become so popular? Why has it become a phenomenon?
Yeah, I wrote an op-ed on this with The Independent UK about a month ago, and so really the points that I made in that piece was, one, there's a ton of layoffs, right? Like there's a lot of layoffs happening right now. This is very similar to the 2008 recession that a lot of millennials face. This is the same situation, just with Gen Z this time. And so I think that with layoffs, there's a lot of confusing feelings, especially around the shame, the guilt, the internalization. And so I think people are trying to find community and normalize and take away the stigma of these layoffs by sharing their moments together.
That is an interesting emotional journey, isn't it? Because you do feel, I remember when I lost a job, and you do feel that it's your fault, don't you? And did you find that you think when you talk to other people who've done this, it's helping them to get over that particular process, to almost show to the world that it isn't my fault?
Yeah, I have seen a lot of that. And not only is it not my fault, but I was treated unfairly. Like, not every company is laying off people unethically, but there's a lot actually happening. I don't know if you saw the really viral one with Brittany Peach, who was a former employee at Salesforce. That one was really popular for a second. And she was terminated essentially without reason, which technically is not legal in the US. And then they kind of made up some stuff about, you know, her performance, and they didn't really match up to what she was saying. And so I think she was recording it out of her own, like, sanity in that moment. So that's a very interesting take that people are doing as well.
Let's bring in Tracy Swinenberg, who's an HR pioneer, often on the program, talking about these sorts of issues. Can I ask you a question, Tracy, to begin with? Thanks for joining us once again. Is it legal to do this? I mean,
it depends. I think that's the HR person's favorite two words, or it depends. And it's illegal in 11 states in the U.S. to not have dual consent. So, like, at the state I live in, New Hampshire, you're technically supposed to have consent from both parties to record audio. But this is so new, and the laws are so nuanced, I don't know that there's a lot of thought behind that. But it is legal in most states in the U.S.
Gabrielle, did you think about that when you recorded it? Did you worry about that?
No, because I never recorded it to share it. Initially, it was purely just for my own thing.
But when you shared it, did you think about that?
I have a good relationship with my former employer, to where if I had a feeling that if they had an issue with it, that they would come to me first, and I would have gladly taken it down. So there wasn't really much animosity to it, and I didn't feel that it was that reckless.
I suppose when we have nowadays, Tracy, so many people moving jobs, and we have had an economy that's been in a difficult situation, there's going to be a lot of these videos out there. There's a lot of people experiencing this.
Yeah, and I think if you're an HR professional, you're a company, you need to be prepared for that. And the best way to do that is treat people like human beings on the way coming in and when you leave. I've been laid off, and I've had to lay off people. I've had to fire people. It's horrible all around, and you have to think about that as an employer. You're talking to someone on what's going to be one of the worst days of their lives, and you have to do that humanely.
Tell me about the worst in both sets of circumstances, when you've had to lay people off or when you've been laid off. Has there been one experience that's stuck in your mind?
Yeah, so when I was laid off, it was a number of years ago, and I think I didn't have empathy, or enough empathy, I should say, for the process. I was much more dispassionate in when I had to fire someone, when I had to do that. And when it happened to me, when my boss came to me and said, we're going to have to cut your position and move forward without you in the new year, it was a wake-up call to me in a lot of ways, but it also gave me a different perspective that I didn't have before. And it was a real turning point in my career where I really made it a mission to, if I had to do these things at an employer, I was going to do it in a way that was as kind as humanly possible.
Yeah, it's not an easy process. Even when you do it kindly, it's something that you feel horrible about. Gabrielle, do you think that a lot of people who are recording this worry about getting employed again? If I run a company and I saw maybe a video of somebody who'd recorded leaving their last company, maybe I'd think twice about taking them on.
Yeah, that's definitely a fair assessment. So that is a belief that's very popular for Gen X and baby boomers, especially maybe some older millennials as well, of the digital footprint and how that's so important. I am old enough to remember the days where we had to set our Facebook albums private so that our employers didn't see our crazy college days and all that, so I do remember that. What's shifting now is because so many younger millennials and Gen Z are starting to step into more leadership roles, that digital footprint norm is starting to lift. So like for me, as I run my business, I don't really look at my employees' social media nor care nor really investigate with that, because with Gen Z and Gen Alpha, we're chronically online. I've had a smartphone since I was 13. So I've shared the cringiest moments, the youngest moments of my life with the world. I'm just kind of used to that now. So for me, I don't really look at it as, oh, who you are on your Snapchat stories, who you're going to be at my job.
Tracy, is that changing? Do you think employers are not looking so much at people's social media? I've got a friend who I was talking to, he's convinced he didn't get a job because of things he posted on his social media accounts. It may be because he wasn't very good at what he does, but he's not really accepting that. That's a different story. But do companies do that? Do HR departments still, or are they doing less of it now?
I think a lot of HR departments do, but it does depend on the industry. So, what Gabrielle is doing, that may not be as important. In other industries, it may be a little bit more important. And I also think it depends on what you share. And you have to be very careful, because there's a lot of laws around that on social media meant to protect people from being able to use social media. So, if I saw, like I watched Gabrielle's video, if I saw that, I would not have a problem hiring her. There are some others that maybe might be more concerning. Okay, well listen, thanks to both of you. Michelle, Andy, have either of you changed your mind now?
No, I'm still not going to quit. I'm happy in my job, and I wouldn't do it on video.
And what is one of the reasons you're not on social media so much? Do you worry about how it may affect the way that people look at you in the workspace, Michelle?
I just think it takes up an enormous amount of energy to do it right, and my focus is elsewhere.
Andy, where are you? TikTok, is that your social media of choice?
No, I don't use social media. I think that now the next generation, the millennials, Gen Zs, they like everybody their private things to be known to everybody. I don't understand why this is, but I guess this is the next generation thing.
Well, there we go. There are the thoughts of many parents across the world, I think. But there are, of course, differences as technology comes along, and people adapt to it in different ways. Business Matters will be back same time, same place tomorrow.